My name is David Ellis. I'm the Director of Communications and Policy Strategy at the Energy Futures Initiative, or as we sort of call it, EFI. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. in the John Peter Zenger Room, either here in person or via live stream, and we know that state energy offices around the country are joining us that way. We are here to formally launch the 2019 U.S. Energy and Employment Report, or USEER, as we call it. As many of you know, the jobs report was launched by the Department of Energy 4 years ago under the leadership of then Secretary Ernest J. Moniz, who joins us this morning. In 2018, the Secretary's Energy Futures Initiative and the National Association of State Energy Officials, NASEO, which are both not-for-profit entities, took over the report when DOE declined to issue new annual versions. By doing this, we ensured that both public and private sectors continue to have access to critical data, providing a unique snapshot of our energy employment ecosystem. By supporting the USEER, we provide in-depth year-by-year data and help create forward-looking analysis on a range of energy employment issues. Now, the data sets associated with this initiative are massive and deep, and much more can be done beyond what we'll be talking about today, and we'll be talking about future projects as well. Today, the entirety of the report, with the supplement outlining energy employment trends in all 50 states and D.C., is available for download at www.usenergyjobs.org, along with an interactive map showing state energy employment by category. The report has been updated and expanded, and the other speakers will tell you how. So there's a lot to dive into, including a panel at the second half of our presentation on the challenges of energy employment. So let me introduce our first speaker and partner in this great project, David Terry, the Executive Director of NASEO.
Good morning. Thank you, David. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and especially for the partnership with the Energy Futures Initiative and BW Research Partnerships. NASEO, the state energy officials around the country, have benefited greatly from this, and we're really pleased to offer and be a part of this launch of the fourth installment of the report. As David mentioned, the data that included in the USEER, or the U.S. Energy Employment Report, includes 5 major sectors you'll hear more about: fuels, electric power generation, transmission, distribution, and storage, energy efficiency, and motor vehicles. And for the first time, the report's going to include an analysis of wages that we also think is particularly important, and many other components you'll hear from some of our panelists later. There are many people to thank as a part of today's announcement and the work that's occurred among our staff and supporters. I particularly want to call out Dave Foster of EFI, Phil Jordan of BW Research Partners, and Sandy Fazeli of NASEO for their leadership in getting the project done. Similarly, our foundation and private sector supporters, many of whom you see up on the screen, I would like to take a moment just to read through them. It's important to note how they've stepped forward in the diversity of the funders: JPB Foundation, Nathan Cummings Foundation, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, E for the Future, McKnight Foundation, Energy Foundation, Advanced Energy Economy, the Clean Energy Trust, the Energy Storage Association, Environmental Entrepreneurs, the Nuclear Energy Institute, and the Solar Foundation. Another part of the sponsorship and supporters we're particularly proud of are how many states have stepped up. The states use this data, literally all of the states, to inform their workforce development, their education programs. And this year we had, more states than ever step forward to help support with financial resources and input and ideas. I'll just list them off quickly: California, Florida, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Wisconsin, and Vermont. I also want to highlight in this year's report, we have an introduction from two governors, Governor Herbert of Utah and Governor Lamont of Connecticut. There's a fantastic bipartisan message in this report about the importance of energy and workforce development to our economy and to everyday Americans' lives, and I really commend you to take a look at that. I also wanted to note that we have Dr. Laura Nelson here this morning on behalf of Governor Herbert. She'll be talking in a panel later. She is Governor Herbert's energy advisor and the director of the Energy Office, as well as NASEO's vice chair, so we're pleased to have her here a little later. I think the interesting part of the report, many of us are maybe energy geeks, or we think of ourselves maybe that way about the data, and it's interesting, but it's a lot more than interesting. The energy offices around the country, and certainly private sector companies, are using this data every day to inform the investments they make. Investments in K through 12 education and energy, universities, community colleges. Literally at our energy policy conference that we had a few weeks ago here in Washington, we heard from Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, New York, all talking about how they're using jobs data, workforce data to help inform what they do. I think a piece of this that we find particularly important, and it's obviously on many people's radar screens now, and that's the importance of workforce development to be inclusive, of a diverse workforce, and also equity issues. So much so, we contributed a particularly important part to the report in that regard, and also have stood up a NASEO Equity in Energy Programs Task Force. The task force met just a few weeks ago, and it's to help the states inform how their energy policies and programs address equity issues. Workforce is central to that. Much of the partnership that we have with EFI over the last couple of years has been through this employment report. However, EFI's work and NASEO's work obviously spans many areas. We have partnerships with many organizations, and I can tell you that in the EFI case, it's really been extraordinary. The team that we have put together, I think, is part of why we've delivered such a successful project, and the input we've gotten from our supporters and from the states has helped greatly. A lot of that has to do with the longstanding leadership of our next presenter. I want to move on and turn it over to, but former Secretary of Energy Moniz's commitment to state partnerships and state activities and energy is well known and greatly appreciated among those in the NASEO community. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the CEO of the Energy Futures Initiative, Ernest Moniz. Ernie?
Well, thank you, David. You said it several times. I'll repeat it. Great partnership, and I think as David Ellis, and we have a lot of Davids here, by the way. As David Ellis said earlier, as you know, this energy jobs report really did start 4 years ago, and I will another David Foster was right at the heart of getting that moved out at the Department of Energy. But the idea that this was something that really needed kind of continuity and yet building out over time with new features, as David. David, I can just say David and always be right. Mentioned was so important. I do want to acknowledge also with EFI. We're now about a year and a half old. Joe Heiser sitting here, and Melanie Kenderdine, who is on her way to Hawaii, were my co-conspirators in establishing EFI, and we try to bring good, hard analysis to energy problems, and that analysis, some of that analysis will be based on things like the enormous database that we are able to generate through this jobs report. I just want to say in terms of well, okay, I'll add one other thing. Certainly, we obviously do present these results to federal policymakers. Last year, when we released the report, we were pleased to be sponsored in that on the Hill by Senators Murkowski and Cantwell, once again emphasizing our bipartisan approach to this. But this year, the focus that we've always had on states has been particularly sharpened by having Governors Herbert and Lamont write the forward. And I will repeat also and welcome Laura Nelson here. I'm happy to say that. So last May, for example, with her persistence, I did go to Utah and take part in Governor Herbert's energy policy meeting, and we appreciate again her support and her being here today. Just in a broad sense, I'd like to say that, today we hear a lot of discussion. I suspect we will hear more discussion over the next while about a Green New Deal. And I do want to emphasize I use the word "a," not "the," at this time, because what this discussion is about, and it's brought to the fore a discussion that we really need to think about going to a low carbon future. I mean, it's happening. If just look around. I mean, and it is happening, and there will be more drive in this direction. But that, I think what's really been added into the mix is bringing into the foreground the idea that in looking at that, we need to also look at the question of who are we bringing along and who are we not bringing along in this transformation that will be happening over years and decades. And that's where I think, again, this report, it's not a policy report, but it provides really critical, fine-grained data that can be used in looking at these issues. So that's the context in which we see this, and in particular as well. And David, one of the Davids referred to it is that we also have this broken down in multiple dimensions, but it's including the state by state breakdowns, which can be used, we hope, quite effectively. So this is, I think this report again will be a central piece of data upon which policymakers at the federal, but very importantly at the state and the regional level can look at. As was mentioned, going back to our time at DOE, we strongly emphasized the importance of looking at states and regions, and I'll just mention in the context again of this dialogue that's going forward in terms of carbon and in terms of communities and jobs, that's been a real focus of ours for years. It will continue to be a focus. And the underlying reason is that when we look at these transformations, whether it's in the workforce or in the approach to low carbon, we're going to have different answers in different states and different regions for very good reasons. The assets, the innovation assets, to the renewable assets, to other energy assets, energy infrastructure issues. So that's its core to the path forward. And again, I think our report hopefully will be an important part of underpinning those considerations. Let me just add two last points. One is that a few weeks ago, and again, David Foster is central to our activities here at EFI. We met also with a number of the labor unions. Another constituency I would mention that is very much looking to be part of a low carbon transition, but one that is, of course, naturally very, very focused on energy infrastructure. Energy infrastructure does relate very closely to jobs, as we all know, and so it gets another constituency that is important. By the way, I forgot I should have mentioned Phil Jordan and BW Research. I guess David Foster will probably say more about another long-standing partnership that we have had in doing this. Finally, I'll just add another little advertisement, and that is that again, the report is really the foundation for then subsequent analysis, hopefully policy making and the like. So another feature that we're going to add this year now following this rollout will be we're going to have a student competition for papers that come forward and present analyses around issues that utilize the data in the report. So I think hopefully every year we're going to be finding new ways of amplifying the impact of what we have here. So with that, I am now going to turn it over to David Foster, who will go through 143 slides in the next 20 minutes. Thank you.